Okay, so what kind of epithelium do you see here? Go back to your AMP1. Which one had cilia on it? Good, the pseudostratified columnar. And so in your respiratory tract, we're going to see a lot of this tissue. Notice there's goblet cells. Goblet cells produce mucus. All right, there are below in the submucosa area, there are some glands that also secrete mucus. But regardless, you see mucus, it's trapping particles, and then the cilia are going to beat to move that mucus towards the throat so that you'll in turn swallow it. Okay. So we see that all throughout the respiratory tract, not just up in the nasal cavity. We'll see it down in the trachea and the upper bronchial tubes. All right, but the next organ we're looking at is the larynx, which is the voice box, and it serves not only as it serves as an air passageway, but it also is where your vocal cords are located. So we'll look at that action. Like I mentioned to you earlier, when you swallow, the larynx moves up to close off its opening so that what you swallow doesn't go down into the trachea. Instead, it goes behind that into the esophagus. As far as the structure of the larynx is concerned, there's a lot of cartilage making up a bulk of it, and three of the cartilages, or the three largest ones, are single, and then there's six of them that are in, or three pairs, or a total of six little tiny ones. You need to be able to locate the large ones, the thyroid, cricoid, and epiglottic. So be able to describe where they are. We're fixing to look at that. And the others, the arytenoid, craniculate, and cuneiform, they're very tiny. Some of those are connected to the vocal cords. They're just within it, and we're not going to locate those, but you need to know that they're present. Okay? All right, and so here you see at the top a picture, an anterior view. If you will be patient, I've got to change this battery again. I just put a new battery in. Just a minute. Now, okay, here we go. Um, I hope that recording took. Anyway, sorry about that. At the top picture, you're seeing a thyroid cartilage, and the cricoid is below it. Do you notice above the thyroid? Remember the hyoid bone from lab in AMP1? Okay, it's above that, and there's ligaments connecting it to the thyroid. But anyway, here you see the thyroid cartilage. That's what we sometimes call your Adam's apple. Okay, is the thyroid cartilage, and then the cricoid is below that. The picture at the bottom is a turned around the opposite direction, so you're looking at it from the back. And what they've done is remove part of the thyroid. The thyroid really should go around, all the way around to the back, but they've removed that so you can see some of the little ones inside, and then you can see the cricoid below it. Cricoid is small on the front, large on the back. Thyroid is large on the front and smaller on the back. It's kind of not a big deal, but just know thyroid is above, cricoid is below. And then you also can see another cartilage called the epiglottic cartilage. If you look at this from the side, well, here you can see them all highlighted: epiglottic, thyroid, and then cricoid. And if you look, I'll come back to all this. If you look at the side view, which is the B picture, the bottom left picture, okay, here part of the thyroid has been removed. So here's the front of the thyroid, and then it comes around. Here's the back. So part's been removed, but here you can see the epiglottic cartilage. And so the rest of this moves up against that epiglottis when you swallow. It's kind of hard to visualize that. But located inside the larynx are your vocal cords. See right here? The vocal cords. And it's a strip of elastic tissue. It's actually two of those. And so that you have two true vocal cords, and there's a little space in between them. The space is called the glottis. So the epiglottis is this part above that has the epiglottic cartilage inside. The glottis is just a space between the two true vocal cords. When air rushes up against the vocal cords, they vibrate. Just like when you pluck a string on a guitar, it initiates a sound wave. Okay. Above the true vocal cords is a little fold of the membrane called the false vocal cord, which doesn't really have anything to do with speech, but it also comes together when you swallow to help close off the glottis below it. Okay? So, this top picture, there's the false vocal cord, and then here's the true. It doesn't really show the true as elastic bands, but that would be true vocal cords, and then up above it, that fold is the false vocal cord. The picture on the side, you can see true vocal cords, and then it looks like the false vocal cords are on the side, but they're really above it. You're looking at it from above. Okay. And here you can see the glottis is opened up, and then here it's closed on the top picture. All right. Now, if we go back to speech a little bit and the sounds, here we go. The sounds that are made by the vibrating of the vocal cords. You know how there's two aspects to your sound. There's how the volume, the intensity of it. Sometimes it's loud, sometimes it's soft. All right, that has to do with the force of air pushing up against the vocal cords. That makes sense. But you also have another aspect to your sound, and that's the pitch. Sometimes it's real high, sometimes it's real low. Right? And so that has to do with two things. That has to do with the length of a vocal cord, and it has to do with the tension on the vocal cord. You can't do anything about the length of your vocal cords. That's genetically determined. Some people have longer vocal cords than other people do. Men tend to have longer vocal cords than women do. Men have lower voices than women do. Children have shorter vocal cords than adults do. Children have higher voices than adults, don't they? If you're familiar with a piano and the strings on the piano, aren't the high notes, don't they have shorter strings? And the low notes are the long strings? Okay. So the length of the vocal cord helps determine the pitch of the sound, and you don't have any control over that. But you do have control over the tension on your vocal cords. They can be tight or they can be loose. And when they're tight, that's like if you were playing a guitar and you tightened up the string, what happens to the pitch? It goes up, right? It goes higher. And if you loosen the string, the pitch drops. So you're constantly doing that. If you weren't, we'd all be monotones and it would be very boring, wouldn't it? So your voice goes up and down, and that's because of the pitch and the tension on it. All right. So now we've gone through the larynx. Now the air would be in the trachea. The trachea is sometimes called your windpipe, and it's that tube that leads from the larynx down to where it forks to go to your lungs. The trachea is one of my favorite organs. I just like the structural aspect of it. It's just an open tube. It's an open pipe. And the reason it stays open is because it has a ring of hyaline cartilage in its wall. It has lots of rings. If you take your hand and go below your voice box on your neck, you can feel those ridges. Those are the rings of hyaline cartilage. And they are there to keep it open all the time so that air can freely move up and down. On this picture, the top left picture, this white area right here, that's the hyaline cartilage. And do you see it's not a complete circle? It stops here, and then it's got smooth muscle connecting it at the back, because behind this is the esophagus. So you want it to be a little bit flexible there because there's an esophagus behind it. Lining it, the little lining right here, that is ciliated pseudostratified columnar epithelium. In AMP1, the slide that you looked at for hyaline cartilage was probably a trachea slide. And the slide you looked at for pseudostratified epithelium was probably a trachea slide. Okay, you can see both of those tissues easily. Um, Here's the real thing under a very low magnification. Sometimes people have to have a tracheostomy done if there's a blockage in the upper airways. Um, right above that, um, maybe due to cancer, tumors, or other conditions, maybe some injury, then maybe a temporary tracheostomy could be performed. Sometimes it has to be permanent, but that's when they cut a hole at the front of it and insert some type of a pipe. If it's an emergency situation, that pipe might be a straw or the tube of a pen, take the insides out, but just to provide an opening into it so that air could move in and out. You'll see that you don't need your mouth or your nose to move the air in and out as we look at the function of the respiratory system and look at inhalation, exhalation. You'll see that the air is just moving on its own without your conscious effort at all. It just moves on its own. We'll see why. Um, but anyway, the downside of that is you have a higher chance of infection because you're not having the filtering aspect of the upper respiratory tract. The air is very dry, so they may have problems with that. But otherwise, it can save your life because it can allow you to still breathe. Okay, below the trachea, it's going to fork, and the first branches of as it forks, those are called the primary bronchi, and they're going to enter each of the lungs. Okay, so you have a left primary bronchus, a right primary bronchus, and then as they branch, you have secondary bronchi, and they supply, each one of those supplies each individual lobe of the lung. And on your left lung, you have 2 lobes, therefore 2 secondary bronchi. The right lung has 3 lobes, therefore 3 secondary bronchi on the right. The easy way that I remember that the left has 2 and the right has 3 lobes is I think about the heart, how it is positioned so it angles more towards the left. And in my mind, I think, oh, that just takes up a little extra space, so the left lung can't have as many lobes. That's probably not really true. The lobe sizes are different on the left and the right, but anyway, that's how I remember that there's 2 on the left and 3 on the right, which you need to know. Okay, and then as the secondary bronchi branch, that they become what we call tertiary or third degree bronchi, and then they continue to branch and branch. There's a lot of branches in the bronchial tree that are not here in your notes on this slide. There are a lot more. But these are the ones I want you to know. You need primary, secondary, tertiary, and then beyond that you get to real tiny little microscopic tubes called bronchioles. And there's a variety of bronchioles. And one thing you're going to notice, I want you to stay on this page. If we look at some of these pictures, okay, here you see this is the trachea, and then here's the primary bronchi. And then here's some of the secondary bronchi. You can see where they branch. All right, but anyway, do you notice there's cartilage a good bit of this way? Everywhere it's macroscopic, you see some cartilage. But the cartilage tends to become a little bit reduced as you get to smaller tubes. So it's not maybe the C-shaped ring. It might be a little plate of cartilage here and there, but that helps to keep it open. But once you get to the tiniest of the tubes, the bronchioles, there's not any cartilage. Instead, you see nothing but smooth muscle at the bronchioles. Okay. Now you have smooth muscle in the wall of the trachea. You have smooth muscle in the wall of the primary, secondary, tertiary bronchi, but it's not as big a percentage. You have, as you move to the smaller tubes, you have a higher percentage of muscle, less percentage of cartilage. Okay? If somebody struggles with asthma, those smooth muscles in these small bronchial tubes are not as relaxed. They tend to get constricted. And so do you see how that would limit the airflow to the air sacs of the lungs? Right? And it feels like they can't get enough air, which they can't. And so some of the medications for that are dilators, muscle relaxers that open up those airways. Okay. So these will be some examples of bronchioles. There's different kinds, like I said, and you don't worry about the different kinds, but just the bronchioles are the microscopic tubes. But they ultimately lead to the little air sacs. Some of the air sacs are sitting right on a bronchiole, some are in clusters, but regardless, the air sac is called an alveolus. Alveoli is plural, alveolus is singular. And up on the top right picture, you see a magnified view of one. And do you see how it's covered by blood capillaries? These are some of those pulmonary capillaries. Right? Blood flows into them. Remember, it's deoxygenated blood coming from the right side of the heart by way of the pulmonary arteries. And then as it leaves that capillary bed, now it's given up its CO2 and picked up oxygen. And it's going to go to the pulmonary veins, which carry it to the left side of the heart. So that blood supply is just as important as the airways, because that the gas, oxygen, and CO2, they've got to be exchanged between the blood and the air. Okay? So the air sacs themselves, the wall of an air sac or alveolus is like the wall of a blood vessel. I don't even have that here. Oh, yeah, I do. Yeah, I do. The alveoli, the tiny little air sacs, the wall is just simple squamous epithelium. And isn't that great? Because oxygen's got to move across it. If it were stratified squamous or cuboidal, couldn't do that. It's got to be that thinnest, just like in the wall of the blood vessel. Okay, so that's where the gas exchange occurs. Okay. Here's the real deal. So you see the alveoli, and you can see the simple squamous in between. All right, and so now we're at the lungs, but we really already have talked about the lungs. The lungs are just a combination of the bronchial tree, the alveoli, blood vessels, nerve fibers, all of that, lymph. All right, all of that makes up the lungs. The medial surface of each lung is called the hilus. That's an indention, a concave area on the medial surface, and that's where everything penetrates it. The blood vessels, the bronchi, nerves. And then in A&P1 you learned about the serous membranes associated with the lung cavity. The visceral pleura is the outer covering of the lung. The parietal pleura lines the cavity that each lung is in. Okay. And then there's a serous fluid in between. So there's no space in between the visceral and parietal membrane. No air-filled space. It's fluid-filled. But they are right close to each other. Okay. All right. So there you can see the lungs protected by your rib cage. If a person has an injury to the lung, like if someone's in a car wreck and they break a rib and the rib punctures the lung, that's called a pneumothorax. And what's happening is that air, because the lung tissue has been damaged, air escapes from the alveoli into that space, the fluid-filled space between the visceral and parietal membranes, and it causes too much air pressure outside the lung and it collapses. But that's called a pneumothorax. So the way they initially treat that is they put a chest tube in that is literally suctioning out that air and any accumulated fluid so that the lungs can inflate again. All right. I want to look a little bit at functions of the respiratory system today, and then we'll call it a day. I want to just look at the process of breathing, which is called ventilation, and it all has to do with air pressure. All right, do you remember? I know you do. In A&P1, when we discussed diffusion, remember particles randomly move from an area of high concentration to low? Heat, when we talked about the skin, heat moves from an area of high temperature to low. When we talk about gases, gases tend to move from an area of high pressure to low pressure. That's just the natural movement, right? And the reason when you inhale, the reason that air moves into you is because atmospheric pressure is higher than alveolar. That means inside the alveoli, the air pressure in the alveoli. So, in order for you to have that change in pressure of the alveoli, for that pressure to drop, something has to happen to the size of the alveoli. And it all has to do with something that you've learned about. You probably possibly don't remember it, but way back when you took physics or chemistry, you learned about all these laws. And one of those was called Boyle's Law, Boyle. You ever heard of that, Boyle's Law? It has to do with gases and their volumes as opposed to their pressures. And when you increase the volume that a gas is in, the pressure of that gas drops. If you decrease the volume and don't change the amount of air, if you decrease the volume, the pressure increases. Does that make sense? If you took like a balloon and you fill it up with air, and then if somehow you could increase the size of the balloon without changing the amount of air in it, do you realize that the pressure of the air is less? Or if you if you decrease the size of the balloon without changing the amount of air in there, the pressure would increase, wouldn't it? Okay, so air pressures and volumes are inversely proportional or indirectly proportional. If you increase the volume, the pressure drops. If you decrease the volume, the pressure rises. That's what Boyle's Law is about. Okay, and so in order for the air pressure outside your body to be greater than the air pressure inside your body, you have got to increase the alveolar space so that the internal pressure will drop. Okay, and that's what happens right before a person inhales. Okay, this is in between your respiratory cycles of inhalation and exhalation. The air pressure and atmospheric pressure are the same. Do you see it? 760 millimeters of mercury, 760 millimeters of mercury inside and outside. So that means there's no movement of air in. But when you inhale, you have got to increase the thoracic size so that the air pressure drops in there. Okay? And when you do that, you are basically contracting two sets of muscles. All right, the phrenic nerve, which comes off your cervical plexus, the phrenic nerve sends an impulse to your diaphragm. Your diaphragm, when it's relaxed, is somewhat dome-shaped. Remember, the diaphragm is the muscle that separates the thoracic from the abdominal cavities. In its relaxed shape, it's dome shape. It goes up a little bit. When it contracts, it moves down. And because it is covered on the top of it by parietal pleura, the parietal pleura is going down. Remember, it lines that cavity? And because there's a serous fluid between the parietal and the visceral pleura, it kind of keeps all that together. So that pulls the lungs down. Okay? So do you see how that increases the space inside the lungs? At the same time, muscles in between your ribs contract. They're called external intercostal muscles. Intercostal means between the ribs. When you eat ribs, you are eating intercostal muscles. But you've got two layers of those. You have external ones and internal ones. And when the external ones contract, the rib cage pulls out. Okay? And so do you see, because it's pulling out, it's pulling the lungs with it, because the visceral and parietal pleura, they have that fluid in between, but that sort of keeps them together. So they don't really separate. They keep together, but that expands the lungs in a lateral, in front and back direction. Okay? So do you see that prior to inhalation, your lung cavity has expanded? That means the alveolar pressure has dropped. Maybe just a couple of millimeters of mercury, but it's still dropped. And now atmospheric pressure is higher than alveolar pressure. Therefore, where does air go? In. You're not consciously making it go in. It's going to go on its own. Now, I'm talking about when you're breathing without thinking about it, your normal resting breathing. You know, if you want to have further inspiration or inhalation, then you consciously have more contractions of those muscles. Okay, but just your everyday, it's just going to happen. Okay, without you thinking about it. Okay, so here um, it's hard to tell on this picture. Here's the on the left, the diaphragm um, is trying to contract, and then the external intercostals are pulling the rib cage out, which is hard to see from that view. You can possibly see it a little bit better here. On the left, you're seeing the diaphragm relaxed. See how it's kind of dome shaped? But on the right, it has dropped down. It's contracted. Okay, and then the rib cage has expanded. So all of that expands the lungs. And so where it started off as 760 millimeters of mercury, now it's 758. And so atmospheric pressure is higher than that. Therefore, air moves in. And I've spent a whole lot of time on that topic. That easy? Easy, easy. Okay. All right. So, what happens when you exhale? You might think, oh, well, it's just the relaxation of those muscles. Well, that's not it. Okay, when you exhale, yes, you're going to decrease the size of the thoracic cavity, but it's basically because of two other aspects. One is called elastic recoil, one is called surface tension. So, I need to explain what those are, and we'll talk about that exhalation, and then we'll call it a day. Elastic recoil, you've got a lot of elastic tissues in the body, and whenever they're stretched or pushed on, they're going to rebound. So it's just a rebounding. For example, when the diaphragm contracts, it drops down, and doesn't that squish on the liver and the upper abdominal organs? They're going to rebound to push that diaphragm back up. Okay, when the rib cage expands and the lungs tissue expands, it's going to rebound. And so that rebounding is called elastic recoil. So do you see how that decreases the alveolar size, which does what to the air pressure, alveolar pressure? It increases it. Okay. Surface tension has to do with water molecules. So, let's see. Remember, water molecules are bound to other water molecules by hydrogen bonds. Do you remember that? They're because of the polarity of this molecule. All right, and so you got hydrogen bonding going on. Okay, so let's say if this is a pond, and here's the surface of the pond water. So you've got water molecules down here, and they're hydrogen bonding to other water all around them. So this is hydrogen bonding. So it can hydrogen bond above, below, all over it, hydrogen bonding. All right, but at the surface, do you see how it can't hydrogen bond to anything above it? It doesn't have water all the way around. It only has water at the sides and below. So it gets a little extra hydrogen bonding right at the surface of that layer of water, because it doesn't have something up above it. And that is referred to as surface tension. Water is a little bit heavier at its surface because of extra hydrogen bonding there. That's why some insects can walk on water. You ever thought about that? It's because of the surface tension on the water. Okay. So what in the world does that have to do with our lungs? If here is an alveolus, that simple squamous epithelium right there. All right, well, you have a little bit of water that coats that. You have to have some water here, because oxygen would not diffuse across that cell membrane if it wasn't dissolved in water. You don't want the whole thing filled up with water, but you have a thin little film of water lining your alveoli. It's very important. But it's not just one layer of water molecules. Water is about as tiny as you can get, isn't it? So it's actually several little layers, but it's still super thin. But at the surface of it, it's got a little surface tension. So when this thing, imagine this is a little bigger. I've got a lot bigger, but imagine it's a little bigger. Because it's gotten bigger, it's going to try to get more surface tension there, which is going to cause it to collapse some. So do you see how that makes it smaller again? Okay. In fact, the surface tension is so powerful in the alveoli that it would totally collapse What prevents a total collapse is a very famous fluid in your lungs called surfactant. And I have this written in your notes. But surfactant is a lipoprotein which is also found, I'll draw it in a different color, it's also found here, which prevents total collapse. You don't produce surfactant until right before you're born. Justin, do you know at what age? Justin is a respiratory therapist. Do you know about what age a baby, a fetus starts producing surfactant? Is it during that 8th month or is it earlier than that? Do you know? A little bit earlier. But sometimes newborn, premature babies, probably the organ system they struggle with the most is the respiratory. And one reason could be the lack of surfactant. The baby doesn't need it before it takes its first breath because it's totally filled with fluid, the amniotic fluid. It gets its oxygen by way of the placenta and gives up its CO2 at the placenta. But so if a baby is struggling with that, they can actually administer surfactant into the lungs. Another reason premature babies struggle with respiratory issues is because lung tissue is super fragile, and it's one of the later organs to develop, I think, fetally, because they don't need it until they're born. And it's super fragile. And so, if that baby has to be put on a respirator, if the air pressure is too great, it's going to blow out the lungs, because it's super fragile. But anyway, the surface tension, without that surfactant, you would not be able to breathe, because after your first breath, your lungs would the alveoli would totally collapse. And you wouldn't have any air movement in there. Scary, isn't it? But thank goodness we have surfactant. Okay? All right, and so, oops, I did that. Sorry about this. Anyway, let's see if I can get rid of all that. There we go. All right. So the two things that cause the alveolar size to decrease would be elastic recoil and then surface tension lining the alveoli. All of that causes the alveoli to shrink, which ups the pressure, which means now it's higher than outside the body, so air moves out. And all that happens very quickly. And thank goodness you don't have to think about it. It's going to happen automatically. Okay. Your resting, normal, quiet exhalation, that's just passive because, there's not really muscle contractions there. It's just these two events taking place. But then your forced expiration does involve some muscle contractions, like when you go, you purposefully exhale. And that's your internal intercostals. They're pulling the rib cage in, which further makes everything smaller, okay? Which ups the pressure. So you can see those pictures here. All right, and then, so this is showing, just like if you took this syringe, when you increase the space inside the syringe by pulling the plunger out, or in this case down, that's the reason air moves in, because you're dropping the pressure. You've increased the space, which drops the pressure, so atmospheric pressure moves in, okay? And then vice versa when you push on the plunger. If you were going to move to a very mountainous area like Wyoming, initially you may struggle a little bit if you start hiking up in the mountains. And it's not because there's less oxygen up there. It's simply because the air pressure is less than it is here in Mississippi. And your body's not used to that. And so there's not as big a difference in atmospheric pressure and alveolar pressure. And it takes your body a little while to adjust to that. Okay? So it has nothing to do with the amount of oxygen in the air. It's the same here and up on the mountains. But it has to do with the pressures. That's why when you fly on a plane, you're in a pressurized cabin, because the farther away from the Earth's surface you get, the lower the atmospheric pressure is. And it would be less than what's in your thoracic cavity, in your alveoli. And so they have to provide that pressure in those cabins. Okay, let's show this video, and then we'll be done.
At the end of expiration, barometric air pressure and alveolar air pressure are equal. Therefore, no movement of air into or out of the lungs takes place. Inspiration begins with contraction of inspiratory muscles to increase thoracic volume. This results in expansion of the lungs and an increase in alveolar volume. The increased alveolar volume causes a decrease in alveolar pressure below barometric air pressure, and air flows into the lungs. At the end of inspiration, the thorax and alveoli stop expanding. Airflow into the lungs causes alveolar pressure to become equal to barometric air pressure. Because the pressures become equal, no more movement of air occurs. During expiration, the volume of the thorax decreases as the diaphragm relaxes and the thorax and lungs recoil. This results in a decrease in alveolar volume and an increase in alveolar pressure. Since the alveolar pressure is now greater than barometric air pressure, air flows out of the lungs. Air continues to flow out of the lungs until alveolar pressure becomes equal to barometric pressure.
All right, that's where we'll stop today. Next time we'll try to finish up this unit.